Hello and welcome to today's show. It is Wednesday. It is the 24th of July. Hi there to Ray, to Nicola, people coming in from all over the world. I tell you, we have got the most amazing show today. If you're not tuning in, you are going to miss something fantastic. There's been so much going on from, if we take the immigration point of view, we've got a whole new government in the UK. If we take tax, we've got whatever changes going on in the United States right now. But we've also had a major outage of the internet over the last few days. And that has got people thinking about, well, what was life like before the internet? We are honored today. We're going to be talking about the evolution of the global mobility industry. Get your time machine out or join us in ours. We're going to go back in time. We're going to be talking about what mobility was like in the 1970s and the 1960s, even in the 1950s. We are going back in time to talk about a world before the internet, a world before Google, before Excel, before Word. It's going to be a fascinating show, and I'm super honored that we have with us on the show today what is almost certainly the most famous father and son dynasty in global mobility. We have with us the legend that is Mike Piker, together with his legendary dad, Fred Piker, who is an extraordinary 92 years young and has worked in global mobility in the 50s and 60s and the 70s. And then Mike can take over in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. We've got a fascinating show for you today. You are going to love it. So everybody, you know how it works. Join the conversation, write in the comments box. Tell us who you are, where you are. Join in the conversation, ask questions, fill out your own thoughts, and just share for this fascinating subject we've got today. As Lusola says, the Piker clan, it's Meet the Pikers today. So we've also got, of course, credits. So if you want your credits, you've got CPE credits. Our good friends at Worldwide ERC have given us the credits for GMS and for CRP. They're up there. And our good friends at Rocket Mortgage have helped us once again get you credits for HRCI or for SHRM. So I'll leave that up there for a moment or two. If you want the credits, then just write down that number or get your phone out and take a picture or screenshot it or whatever you want. So that is a fascinating show. And then next week actually is our last show before we take our summer break. We always take August off. And next week, we've got a real treat for you. So do make sure you tune in next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about celebrities on the move. And we've got the hosts with us of a podcast under that name. It's called Celebrities on the Move. We've got Shia Diane and Rekha Simpson. And we're going to be talking about things like the immigration status of Prince Harry, or Beyonce, or Taylor Swift when they go on tour, or Pharrell Williams, or I don't know, some of the footballers like Mbappe, Oscar winners like Cillian Murphy. We're going to be going A-list next week. So if you've ever wondered what are the global mobility implications of being a celebrity, and we're not talking about, Z-listers here, we're talking about the A-list. So you're going to find it absolutely fascinating next week. So do tune in. Next week, we're going to be talking about, as I said, celebrities on the move with Shia Diane and Rekha Simpson. You are going to love it. I promise you. Anyway, what's been happening in the wonderful world of global mobility over the last 7 days? Well, let's have a look at our breaking news. So there we have it. That's all our breaking news of the week. All congratulations to everyone who's been promoted, everyone who's moved job. I suppose a particular shout out actually to the first one there on that list. We've got Mike Piker, who's moved to Tokyo and to Shiseido, and indeed he's backstage as part of the Piker clan that we're going to have on, talking about the evolution of global mobility over the last 70 years. Let's move into the show itself, and we're going to start off talking about immigration. And I'm super delighted. Well, unfortunately, Julian Cole can't be with us today, but I'm super delighted that in her place we have the wonderful, he's been on our show before, the wonderful Shweb Mquet from Fragment. So everybody, you know how it works. Hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and let's talk immigration with Shweb. Doing?
Hi, Brian. Thank you for having me again.
Great to see you again, and so much going on. So tell us, what are you going to talk to us about today?
Well, we've got a new government, and they've been moving very fast. They have not been in power for the last 14 years, so they've had a lot of pent-up policies waiting to deploy, and we are seeing a lot of action. And my overall description is what a fast 2 weeks this last period has been, and we're seeing a lot of noises about immigration, and so that's really the topic I'm going to be focused on today.
Okay, well, let's find out. So what's happened in the first couple of weeks of the UK's new Labour government? Has it been a big change?
Well, I mean, can I just give you some context? First of all, I made the point that this is the first time in 14 years that the Labour government has been back in power. And I know we've got the Piker clan who will be giving a long view of the mobility history and how things have changed over the year. Just to give a context, since 1900s, the Conservative Party had won 18 elections and the Labour Party have won 10 elections. And as I said, this is the first time in 14 years that Labour have been coming in power. They've got a huge majority, and on the face of it, it looks like they have really the mandate to do what they like. But just to look at the underbelly of that detail, they had a very relatively low popular vote. They only secured a big majority, but with only 33% of the vote. And in fact, there is still a massive opposition in a different form. You've got Conservatives, you've got an increased number of Liberal Democrats, and in fact, you've got now the Reform Party. I mentioned the Reform Party, of course, because their main kind of policy mantra is in relation to immigration and, of course, reducing immigration. So despite the majority of the Labour Party, they will still be, in some respects, constrained by having an eye on what is being said by the broader coalition that has developed within the opposition in Parliament. So that is the context in which we have to judge how much movement there's going to be. But that said, we are seeing essentially four general areas of policy continuity and change. The first, of course, is in relation to net migration. Net migration, of course, was the feature that dictated really the policy movements of the last government. Everybody will remember last December, the Conservative government had introduced increased restrictions on the post-Brexit immigration system, increased salary thresholds, restrictions on dependents, increasing prices. And this current Labour government has also made the call for reducing net migration, but unlike the Conservatives, they are not focused on absolute numbers, and that, of course, gives us some sense that they are not really going to be talking about reducing numbers other than as necessary. They will be focused on quality and what is needed by the UK. And so in that sense, although net migration is put forward as a feature of their policies, we're not going to, I don't think, expect hard policies simply to reduce net migration for the sake of it. The background to, of course, all of that is that the main mantra of this new Labour Party is economic growth, and that will really dictate the agenda of policies. So net migration, there's a bit of continuity, but also change. As I said, they want to reduce net migration, but they're not concerned with absolute numbers. The second aspect of continuity and some change, of course, is their prioritising of irregular migration. Everybody will remember under the Conservative Party, the big policy ticket was the returns to Rwanda. The first thing that the Labour government did on entry was to start dismantling that particular policy and replace it with their own attempt to challenge irregular migration. Rather than stop the boats, this Labour government is now intent on smashing the gangs. We already have some legislation coming in to withdraw the Rwanda policy. And of course, our new Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, wasted no time in trying to recruit a new head of border command. And in fact, when Keir Starmer had his first meeting with his European colleagues, which was, I think, on the 18th of July, he put at the front of his agenda conversations about more return agreements with Europe as part of the first step towards realignment. So that's the second phase of the policy agendas that we see, focus on irregular migration. Connected to that, more closer alignment with the EU. The big political drama of the UK under the Conservative Party, of course, was Brexit. The leader of the Labour Party, of course, has oscillated in his views about whether or not he wants to be part of European Union or not. He began his career in the Labour Party within the Remain camp. When he went through his leadership campaign, of course, he moved to the side accepting the Brexit result. But of course, now he, as the new Prime Minister, he wants to recalibrate our relationship with Europe, improve alignment. And of course, we will see a lot more conversations in that direction. Our new Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, in fact, on the second day of the new government, went to visit his European partners, I think in Poland and Germany. So, that's a third element of the new Labour government.
And the fourth, yeah. So we're seeing like a general movement, a direction of movement. And what's the fourth point?
The fourth one is the tinkering that we talked about on the last occasion. We are expecting announcements of various reviews of the current immigration system in relation to the increased salary thresholds, increase of the restrictions on dependents. And of course, last week, the Labour Party announced the creation of Skills England, which is an attempt to triangulate, a body to triangulate the needs of the UK labour market, the shortages, and to connect different aspects, the business unions, and of course different regions, and therefore to try and reduce demand for overseas labour. And that is, of course, the final aspect we say of that we can see emerging in what is, as I say, quite a quick period. And we will see how all of these things roll out in the medium to long term.
Okay, so thank you so much for that, Shoaib. I mean, it's fascinating because you say it's the biggest shift there has been in 14 years. And we're now starting to see the new government, if you like, showing its teeth and saying that the direction of travel, and they're moving from manifesto to reality. We're going to move on now. We're going to switch side of the pond from the UK, where we've been talking about immigration, to the US, where we're going to be talking about tax. And I'm super delighted that we have with us backstage the wonderful Julie Barron from Vialto. So everybody, you know how it works. Hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button, and please say thank you to Shoaib from Fragaman and welcome onto our stage Julie Barron from Vialto Partners. Hey, Julie, I know nothing has been happening in the US. No sort of assassination attempts, no palace coups. It's all been pretty boring, really. Nothing's happened.
Such a quiet week, yeah.
Tell us about what's been going on in your world.
Yeah, so I had planned last week to come on and talk about the Biden versus the Trump tax plans ahead of the election, but now I'm going to talk about what we think might be the Democrat plan versus the Trump tax plan.
I see you're calling it the Democrat plan, not the
Harris plan.
Not the Kamala, the Harris plan.
No, because we don't know for sure yet, right? Yeah. So the convention is in about 3 weeks' time. So we'll know more at the end of that convention. But it'll be a fascinating convention to watch because we just don't know what's going to happen. Okay, so I'll give a little bit of background about when during the last Trump administration, we had the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which we called TCJA. So a lot of the provisions of TCJA were set to expire in 2025. And so a lot of the Biden tax plan was to let those cuts expire and go back to the old tax rules, the old rates, and some of the old things that were in there. So obviously that was Trump's plan in the first place. So his plan is to keep those and make those permanent. So I just wanted to give some highlights of some of those things. And I'll focus mostly on individuals, but just as a major highlight, Trump brought the corporate tax rate down to 21%. So that was a significant decrease in the corporate tax rate.
What was it before?
It was 35.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so it was a significant decrease in the rate. Joe Biden's plan was to increase it to 28%. So I would think that somewhere around there is where the corporate tax rate will land if we have a new Democratic administration. On the individual side, the top rate of tax was at 37% under TCJA. So obviously Trump would keep that, but Biden has said he would increase that to 39.6. So a small increase. So we'll see what happens there. One of the biggest things that happened under TCJA was they got rid of personal exemptions for dependents. So your children were no longer an exemption or a deduction on your tax return. They made the standard deduction, which is how much you get automatically off your tax return, much larger. So everyone just got a standard deduction and you didn't get individuals deductions for your children. But they did also increase the scope of the child tax credits. So higher earners were now eligible for child tax credits, and the child tax credits were a lot bigger. So both the Democrats and the Republicans want to keep those child tax credits and keep those for the higher earners. The Democrats are really focused on a couple things. First of all, increasing taxes on anyone who makes more than 400,000. So that seems to be the magic number. If you're over 400,000, you should pay a higher rate of tax.
Much higher? Are they talking about a much higher rate now, or
yeah, so one of the taxes that we have what we call the net investment income tax, which right now is 3.8%. He wants to increase that to 5%. So that's in addition to any income tax you pay on that. He wants people who make more than 400,000 to lose out on a lot of deductions and things like that. So it's kind of a thing where he's basically taking away a lot of deductions if you're over that $400,000 magic number. He does have a special tax that he wants to impose on people over $100 million of assets. So that's the extremely wealthy. He wants them to pay a minimum amount of tax of 25% per year, and also cap some of their ability to invest more and things like that. People over $1 million could see different taxes on things like long-term capital gains rates, which right now have a nice low rate of 20%. So you pay 20% when you have a long-term capital gain. He wants anyone who makes over $1 million to have to pay 39.6 on those instead of having that nice advantage of 20%. He wants to tighten up some of the rules on the estate tax, which Trump increased the exemption for estate taxes. So that was a big thing. But the biggest item that is always fought between the Republicans and Democrats is the limitation on the deduction for state taxes. So against your federal taxes, you get a deduction for state taxes. Part of TCJA was to cap that at $10,000. So it's interesting that it doesn't really always follow along party lines, the SALT cap. but more along the lines of people from high tax states versus low tax states. So the people from high tax states want that deduction to be uncapped. So we'll see what happens to that. But the most interesting thing I think that Trump threw out there at a rally or something like that was that he wants to exempt tips from income tax. So right now, if you are a restaurant employee, and I have to say in the U.S., and I don't know about the rest of the world, I think everyone wants a tip nowadays. Everywhere you go, they're asking to add a tip on your credit card, but he wants to exempt.
Nobody's ever tipped their accountant, though, I'm afraid.
No one's ever tipped me. Anyway, so he wants to exempt tips from income tax because right now, if you get a tip, even if it's cash, you're supposed to add that into your income tax return. And apparently, there's $38 billion of tips reported on people's income tax returns every year. And 6 million taxpayers pay income tax on their tips. So that was one of the things that he said he would change. In addition to making these tax cuts permanent, he would also exempt tips from income. And to me, that's just a way to get more votes from all these people who earn a lot of tips as part of their salary.
No, absolutely. So, a lot of people liking that as
oh, of course. Yes. There's a lot of people earning a lot of money on tips. So anyway, so those are the latest.
One last question, though, is you talked about Trump and you talked about the Democrats, but obviously we are in a period of transition from Joe Biden to somebody else, and
maybe Harris. Yep.
I'll say the working assumption we could say is Harris.
Yes.
If it is Harris, do you think the existing Democrat policy will stay the same, or do you think they might shift? And if so, which way do you think they might shift?
I think her tax plan would probably be a little further left of where Biden's was. And so you might see more of an increase in rates. You might see that $400,000 come down a little more. You might see some of these other things. So I think she would be more of a tax the wealthy than Joe Biden was. But we will see. We
certainly will. Come November. It's going to be a fascinating few months. Yeah. So, Julie, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate you being on the show. We're now going to be moving on, and I'm just so excited. We're going back in time. We're going to be talking about global mobility. Well, actually, it wasn't even global mobility then. International personnel in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and how our industry has evolved over the last 70 years. And we have with us Mike Piker, age undisclosed, and for his father, Fred, who I believe is age 92. So this is going to be incredible. So everybody, like you've never done it before, hit the heart button, hit the like button, hit the applause button. Let's say a big thank you to Julie Barron, and welcome onto our stage, Mike and Fred Piker. Hey, Mike, Fred, it's just so great to have you both here on stage with us at the show. There's going to be loads of questions, loads of comments. Michelle saying, great to meet your dad, Mike. Great to see you, Fred. So I'm going to start off, actually, and this is in a way how it came out. Mike, you posted something about the fact on, I think it was on LinkedIn or Facebook or somewhere, about your dad had written a book, and it's, you know, a lot of it is a very personal story, but a lot of it is about global mobility or international personnel, international HR, how it was. So, Fred, just tell us a bit about the book, first of all.
Well, let's say a couple of years ago, Brian, I decided to write a memoir. My wife had passed about a year before, but I found that in discussions with several family and friends, that a number of them had gone through a series of life experiences where they found it challenging to sort of get to the other side. In other words, move on to life's next chapter. And this led me to kind of reflect at least on my own experiences, particularly when I was, traveling so much internationally, and I would be away from home many periods of long periods of time, which kind of disrupted, if you will, family harmony and so forth. But yet, let's say, because of at least the love of family and community, and also a strong believer in faith and religion, this is the kind of thing that helped to carry me through and our family through. And let's say a number of people, including Michael and another close friend, Tony Farina, the former Organization Resources Counselors employee, now known as Mercer, encouraged me to jot down some of the unusual experiences that I had had internationally that might be useful to those particularly who are considering going into international human resources and or other life-challenging, if you will, experiences.
And we'll get into some of those as we go on. But for anybody who hasn't read it or would like to read it, we put the link up there. I can tell you, I read it a few weeks ago, and it's a fascinating read. So so Fred Piker's book is available there. It's also available, I think, on Amazon and other places. But Mike, first of all, to you, congratulations on your new role. I know you've moved just very recently. So you're now in Tokyo with Shiseido. So you're a legend of you're both legends. We can have a legend competition here. But Mike, just tell us a bit about Shiseido and your new role.
Yeah, moved from London to Tokyo. My fourth time living in Japan. Shiseido is essentially one of the top cosmetic beauty brands in the world. So it's a brand I identify with. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
Cool. Well, it's great to have you both on. And so, Mike, you basically followed your dad's footsteps, didn't you? Because your dad was with ORC. For those people who don't remember ORC was acquired by Mercer. So in a way, ORC then is Mercer now. It was a very major player in, if you like, the data side, the consulting side of our industry. But Mike, so you followed your dad's footsteps into ORC. What was that like?
It was one of the best experiences of my life. A small
right
boutique.
Right answer.
Exactly. And I was a 22-year-old kid who happened to start in New York, and they believed in supporting me to go to Japan and help when my dad built Yokogawa ORC in Tokyo. And then when I was, I guess, 25, Siobhan helped me and my dad to build ORC Singapore.
Siobhan Cummins, I know she's in the audience today,
yeah,
so shout out. And she also helped with the giving some feedback into the book. So big shout out, Siobhan Cummins, a change maker, a guest on the show many times, and a great friend and thought leader in our industry. So Fred, let's just go back in time. You started off in your working career with GE in the 1950s. Is that right? Tell us a bit about your career journey.
I started during my junior year at Harvard. For 3 summers, I had summer training assignments with General Electric on the Employee Relations Development Program. And after Cornell Graduate School, I joined, if you will, GE full-time, moved all around the country, ended up at International GE, and then subsequently was asked to join Honeywell as the first international personnel director, and subsequently from Honeywell onto Organization Resources Counselors. I had a wonderful experience with General Electric, and I learned a great deal that helped propel me into my quest for doing international human resources work.
Well, let's go back in time. I mean, the companies you've mentioned. In fact, funnily enough, both GE and Honeywell have been guests on this show before. In fact, we've even talked about the GE leadership program. We had Julie Grisada from there, and we've had people from Honeywell on the show too. A number of times. So absolutely fascinating. Obviously, a lot of companies don't exist after a period of time, but these are companies that have been around for a long time and are still with us, which is great. But if we go back, and I'm sort of reminded about it because of this outage we had the other day. I don't know how other people were affected, but we had this outage and we had no internet, and it affected people, some people significantly, some people minor. But it certainly got me thinking, what was it like back then? To me, I can't imagine a world where I'm managing an assignment program without being able to do Excel spreadsheets or to do. Oh, I just heard that. There's a cuckoo clock in the background. Tell us about the cuckoo clock. I heard that. Tell us about the clock.
Very, 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 very quickly. When Michael was in Switzerland many years ago, he bought me a wonderful cuckoo clock, and I had it for a number of years. And then inadvertently, one day, I dropped it on the floor, and it was smashed. Michael bought me another one, and so that's the cuckoo clock that you just heard. It's a wonderful cuckoo clock. I'm a clock nut. I have a chime clock and a wall clock, but I really love the cuckoo clock. It cuckoos and it also dances around.
Well, I tell you, we always end the show at the top of the hour, so I shall make sure we heard the cuckoo go, striking what it is, 12 in New York time, 5 for me. So we'll wait to hear that cuckoo in half an hour's time. But just going back to, we talked about the love of, or the need we all have for Excel and Word, and also if I want to know something these days, I Google it, or maybe I go on ChatGPT. But then it wasn't that; it was libraries and research files and what have you, and also contacting people. It's these days it's all email. In those days it was faxes. So Fred, tell us, going back to say the 1950s or 60s, how did you organize it? How did you manage the fax, the just raw data you had to deal with? How did you manage it? I can't even believe what it must have been like.
Well, some of it, of course, was done by paper and pencil. Also, back in those days, people used fax machines, and I can remember whenever I traveled around the world, the president of ORC said, "You must document, your meeting with the client in a contact slip," which I did, and then this would be faxed off to the New York office. I carried with me wherever I traveled around the world, if you will, a portable typewriter, and also a very early version of a computer and so forth. But this is what we had to do. Sometimes, let's say, it also required using tapes, if people still remember what tapes were. But that's the way we had to communicate. And but it's a much different world now.
Okay, so in fact, I'm going to ask the audience, if you were thrown back to the 1960s, what aspect of today's technology would you miss the most when managing your assignees? And I'll give you those 4 choices: Excel, Word, Google, email. Of course, you may well say actually you'll miss the technology platform like the Benivo system, but putting those to one side, just on the very simplest thing, what's the one thing you would find the hardest to do your job if you didn't have? Okay, so spreadsheets, word processing, Google, or email. Mike, what's your point of view? What would you miss the most if you were thrown back in time?
Strangely enough, I said Word, just the simple transcription. Most people would say Google, right? But I don't know. For me, it was Word. Just struck me. Without it, I can't do my job. Yeah,
because and people, we've got, I think, a mix of ages on the show. But if we're talking about some of the, our younger viewers who maybe don't remember a world before, let's just take writing a report. So, these days, most people don't have EAs or secretaries, they just type it themselves. They might type it into Word. It may even be they get GPT to do it. But Fred, in your day, how did you do it? I mean, I think you said you actually traveled with a little portable typewriter. So were you
Yes,
a good
I did.
Yeah, were you good? Did you carry bottles of correcting fluid with you when you traveled?
No, I didn't. I didn't carry with me correcting fluid, but I did carry with me ORC stationery, along with the printer and the early version of the computer. And let's say when I would have a client meeting, I would document it and then eventually fax it to the meeting back to the ORC New York office. But for example, I would go to visit a client. I remember once, for example, going to Damascus and met with some people there, and then I had to make a proposal on the spot. I did it with the ORC stationery, gave it to them, and then faxed a copy to the New York office. But that's the way we had to operate way back when.
And Saunders said, she asked a question, and I'm sure you carried carbon paper. Did you carry carbon paper when you went traveling? I just want to know what your suitcase looked like. So you got paper in there, you got a typewriter.
I don't remember, Brian, carrying carbon paper, but I would make, if you will, two copies of whatever I sent to as a backup. But this was incidentally.
You made a typing mistake.
It was a battery-powered computer, and I can remember one time when I had to go back into Iran at the time of the Iranian Revolution, that I flew from Saudi Arabia into the lower part of Iran, and when I went through customs there, they actually confiscated my batteries, so I couldn't use the computer thereafter. But anyhow, I learned to get by.
What did they think you were going to do with these batteries?
Well, let's say I really don't know, but let's say I told the inspector that I really needed those, and he said, you have your choice, Mr. Piker. Either we take the batteries and you go on, or else you stay here. I decided it was more important that I get on to my assignment in Iran. I ran out to the airplane where the engines had already started to head off to Tehran, and I got by without my computer to finish the rest of the assignment.
And I know, Fred, you've worked in some fascinating places. I do recommend the book, actually. You've worked in some fascinating places and at some fascinating times. I think one of the ones I found the most fascinating, and I was just scared for you. And obviously, I knew it had a happy ending because I read the book. But you were in Iran at the time of the falling of the Shah of Iran and the Iranian Revolution. I mean, what was that like? Because that sounds, especially without the communications, these days you might be sort of emailing your family or Zooming them or what have you. But what was it like being in somewhere that was going through such radical change in a generation without modern technology?
Well, at that time, Brian, I was actually project director of a very major project in Iran, where we were doing an overall survey of the Iranian Civil Service Commission. And let's say the project had been going on for a period of time, and I was in Saudi Arabia, and I received a call from the Director General of Compensation for the Iranian government and said, Fred, I want you to come back in. Well, let's say this was in the early part of November of 1969, and I obviously had been very much aware of what was going on. And I gulped a little bit, and she said, you really have to come here, Fred, because we have to, complete the project. So I flew off to Abadan, and as I indicated, then I moved on to Tehran. And I can remember when I went into Tehran, I stayed overnight all the time that I was there at the Park Hotel. The next morning, I said to the people at the desk, I have to let my family know and ORC New York know that I'm in Iran, because they didn't know. And they said, well, they said, the only way you can do that, you have to go to the PTT building. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, that's a special building where there would be a telephone connection. So they hired a taxi. I went down through the streets of Tehran in the taxi. Everything was very, very quiet. Nobody was around. Nobody was driving. And we went into this massive square. And I remember as we entered the square, there had been a picture in the New York Times a couple months before where the Iranians had massacred 3,500 Iranian people. And as we entered the square, there were all these tanks ringed in a circle with the guns pointing in, and down in the lower right-hand corner was the PTT building. I gulped a little bit and I said to the taxi cab driver, will you wait for me? He said, yes, Mr. Piker. He drove me down there. And then I went in. After a while, with my pidgin Farsi and some English, I was able to communicate to someone to help me make the phone call to New York. And then I went back out, and fortunately, the taxi driver was waiting. We got in the car and we drove back out through the gate. And then for the next whatever it was, 4 or 5 days or a week, I worked with the Director General of Compensation and her staff. I had to handwrite a report, which she then translated into Farsi, and we went back and forth a little bit, and then I returned. But let's say that was at least the last time that I was in Iran, other than the incident, really, of that square. That was the only, serious, if you will, challenge that I faced at that time.
Yeah, but that's a pretty big one. I mean, I know they say the client should always come first, but I mean, yeah, that was putting client service, I think, over and above everything. I want to move on the conversation because I called the title of the show the evolution from international personnel to global talent mobility, the evolution of an industry. And in a way, I've got you there, Fred, working in international personnel, and you, Mike, I saw you put posts or you're speaking on sort of generative AI and you're a thought leader in talent mobility. What is the difference between mobility then, in other words, international personnel as was, and what it is now? I'm not talking about just the words. I'm talking about, if you like, the philosophy, the strategy. Mike, do you want to sort of give a view of how you think the industry has changed since your dad's day?
Yeah, we might say it started as, if you will, international personnel, predominantly oil and gas companies, without any balance sheet structure in place then. So first, just getting particularly global UK, US companies to go international, hence why it was called international personnel, before even tax equalization existed, before the balance sheet even existed.
Yeah, I've got to say, I don't know whether people are going to love you or hate you, but you guys, especially Fred and some of your colleagues, you pretty much invented the balance sheet. I mean, it's just extraordinary. Things we take for granted, was stuff that you guys were developing as thought leadership. But anyway, so Mike, you carry on.
Yeah, and so then it evolved, if we will, to international assignment, and then eventually global mobility. And now what's in vogue, obviously, is talent mobility. So there's been, as Dad knows, an evolution over 70 years from that to that. And you're going from purpose and duration driven mobility to talent led mobility. And that's a huge evolution from international to global. So that's at least from my perch, what I've observed.
Because I think back in the day, and Fred, I'm interested in your views on this, back in the day, it was much more a question of head office out. You had a big central head office, and then you sent out people to manage local subsidiaries. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because you talk about this in your book, Fred, is one of the things that you guys invented in ORC, was something so blindingly obviously these days, was having assignment objectives. And maybe one of those objectives is actually you should be able to train up a local to do the job. It shouldn't always be the typically American expat running the local thing. Tell us a bit about that. Tell us about, if you like, how it was head office outbound and the move to becoming more global in your latter years in practice, Fred.
Well, as Michael indicated, of course, in the period right after World War II, it was primarily the oil companies that had experience of sending people around the world, and companies suddenly found, in order to compete internationally, they really had to have, if you will, global talent and global reach. And so, let's say, a number of the non-oil companies, let's say, initially just started sending people abroad without, if you will, a whole lot of structure as to a definition of the assignment, let alone what would be the appropriate package of allowances and perquisites and so forth. And it ended up being, if you will, in many cases, quite costly and inconsistent with the company. And so at least ORC is among the companies that help to provide some structure to companies in terms of creating policies and perquisites that were fair both to, if you will, employees and the company. And so that was a lot of the principal focus, at least at that time, in terms of trying to just come up with the right combination of equity to both. And along the way, more focus began to be given to what really is the purpose of sending the person abroad. And so I think ORC was helpful in terms of defining, if you will, assignment objectives. And as part of this, getting back to some of Michael's comments, the whole function of international personnel or international human resources clearly became, if we're going to succeed as a company globally, we have to have people with international experience. And so, let's say, I think a lot more thought began to be given toward the importance of having international experience under one's belt, along with domestic experience in terms of rising up to the top.
And I think another thing that has changed is the way we design the package. And I mean, one thing everybody on this show is going to know is they're going to know about cost of living adjustments, COLA, and they probably get tables from, Air Inc. or Mercer or ECA or whatever. And these days, a lot of it is clearly very, very automated. But in your day, Fred, people went around with flip boards and pen and paper and spoke to the store manager. Tell us a bit how people worked out cost of living adjustments back in the day.
Well, back in the 60s and 70s, ORC leaned very heavily on data that was provided by the U.S. Department of State. And one of the things that, we did was to monitor, if you will, inflation rates, both in the U.S. and the host country, as well as exchange rates, and then, automatically, if you will, adjust the so-called cost of living index. But more specifically, we had, if you will, a paper and pencil retail price schedule, and a number of us, including myself, would go out and to a particular location. Before going there, we knew, if you will, the target, if you will, outlets, to price and so forth. We would go in, we would get permission and so forth, and then then using paper and pencil, that's the way we recorded the data. One interesting bit that I think your audience might find of interest, I can remember one of the first times that an ORC person, including myself, did a pricing in Riyadh. And I went into some of the grocery stores, and let's say at that time, there were different prices for cereals. There was one price for cereal with weevils, and then another price for cereal without weevils. This all had to do with the fact at that time, let's say there was the ships would come into the port of Jubail and so forth, and then goods would have to be transported overland without refrigeration. So these are some of the interesting things that we encountered in the early days of pricing. But all of that, of course, has changed now with technology. But it was paper and pencil way back then.
And also, I think another thing that's changed is the fact that I suppose people assume efficient purchasers, that, that it's not, if an American is going to Saudi, for the sake of argument, it's not how much is the cost of, say, a packet of Oreos, it's how much is a packet of cookies. And the assumption now is that you might buy a local brand, whereas, back in the day, it was more about getting exactly the same thing to maintain your home-based lifestyle. And Fred, one of the things you talk about quite a lot in the book, which I found fascinating, was the projects you had to do when you had to go out to people maybe living in compounds in remote locations, and basically tell them that you were having to cut back their packages because the packages were, to put it bluntly, too rich and too inconsistent. I mean, how did you manage to do that? And I know that must have been quite traumatic for people working in difficult locations.
Well, a specific example of that, my first time, Brian, to Iran was in December of 1969. For several years, ORC had a contract with the oil consortium, and my former boss, Mr. Dickover, had been the consultant, and he asked me to take over that particular assignment. And when I went to Iran and met with the consortium human resources people, there was a big struggle at that time about trying to make the whole package, if you will, more cost effective. Among the things that I had to do after we reached consensus on what the changes would be in the compensation package, I and another colleague from the Oil Consortium Human Resources Group went to a place called Majesty-u-Suleiman down in the southern part of Iran, where oil was first discovered. This was unbelievable. Let's say the most challenging place that I have ever been, and I'm sure that many people have ever been in my life. It's down on the southwestern corner of Saudi Arabia, and we landed on top of a dirt landing strip that had been cut off from the top of a mountain, and then we were met by a driver who took us through a jungle to a walled compound. We passed by on the way to this walled compound where all the expatriates lived. There were many dirt mounds where 100,000 natives lived if you will, in the ground. We went into the compound, and I had to present to the 125 expatriates and families living there inside the compound that the package would have to be cut. At the very end of that,
did you get out alive?
Well, a husband and wife approached me. The tears, Brian, were coming down from their eyes, and they said, "Mr. Piker, we understand why the oil consortium has to do this. However, once a month, as a result of the package that we had, we could afford to take a plane from Majesty-u-Suleiman back to Tehran to go to the Radaki Theater. With this cut, we no longer are going to be able to do it. So therefore, we are going to have to remain in this godforsaken walled compound where we couldn't go outside," and so forth. So that's at least, if you will, I did not get fired at or stabbed, but it was challenging, and the consortium wanted Piker, the fall guy, to take all the heat.
Fred, I mean, we're sort of beginning to get towards the last few minutes, which is sad because we could talk for hours on this, and the stories you tell are just incredible. And as I said, I do recommend the book, but there's a personal story as well, Fred, that I'd just like to ask you to share in the little time we got left, is that you personally overcame great hardship. I mean, you went to Harvard, which is an amazing achievement, but as a young child, you had polio, which is a disease that thankfully is pretty much eradicated, certainly in the West. But tell us what it was like to have polio. It's just too horrendous to imagine. But tell us a bit about it.
Well, very briefly, I woke up one morning when I was 8 years old, and I was completely paralyzed from the neck down. I lost my voice. Off to the hospital. After a couple of weeks, the doctors discharged me, and they told my mother and dad that if Freddie survives, he'll be in a wheelchair or braces or an iron lung the rest of his life. My mom and dad did not buy that. They contacted Sister Kenny, the Australian nurse who treated
she's very famous, isn't she?
Yeah. And she said, exercise Freddie's limbs several times a day, which she did for 18 months. And eventually my parents got me to the point of where I could at least somewhat sit up. And Sister Kenny told my dad, take Freddie down to the YMCA swimming pool, throw him in the water and teach him how to swim. That's what brought me back. And I'm very grateful, obviously, not only to my parents, but to Sister Kenny. But all of this would have not have happened had it not been for the weekly visit of our pastor, who every week for 18 months came and prayed with us. And the combination of that pulled me through.
And I know ever since then, you've been a lifelong swimmer. And in fact, in the book, you tell a story about that is your cure for jet lag. So tell us, because a lot of people, do travel a lot. So tell us the Fred Piker cure for jet lag.
Well, as we talked before, I am a bit of an exercise nut. Even at my age, I go to a health club 7 days a week and so forth.
Oh,
and
probably...
I did make the swimming team back in high school. I did butterfly breaststroke for 4 lengths of the pool. I'm very strong from the upper body up, but not my legs. But anyhow, as a result of all of this swimming, and in particular, when I would travel internationally, what I would do before getting on the plane, say at JFK to go overseas, I'd go to a pool and swim a quarter of a mile. And then as soon as I landed in Saudi Arabia or wherever, I'd swim another quarter of a mile. But I did this whenever I traveled internationally. But as a result, I never experienced jet lag. And even when Michael invited our whole family over to Amsterdam at the end of 2023, same thing. I didn't experience any jet lag. So swimming is the answer, Brian.
Okay, so everybody out there, if you want to cure jet lag, swim. Now, the other thing, we've got 2 minutes left, and we're going to hear the cuckoo clock. I'm not going to finish the show until we've heard the cuckoo clock. But the one thing that we want to ask, because there's something, I actually think, Fred, you're the most amazing guest I've ever had on the show. But your daily routine, you told me, is you used to get up at some, I can only just say, godforsaken time in the morning. So tell me about your daily routine when you used to get up.
He did.
Well, when I worked in the New York office, Brian, as a family, we were a very close family, and I wanted to stay as close to not only to my spouse but to the children as possible. And so where we lived in a small village, roughly a little over an hour from New York City, I would get up at 4:45 in the morning, do my exercises, have a little bit of breakfast, walk into the train station.
3:45 a.m. Fred Piker, you are in that case. 3:45 a.m. you used to get
30
up.
years. 30 years.
30 years. Okay. So that's the secret to a long life, swimming every day and getting up at 3:45 a.m.
Yep.
Extraordinary.
And then I'd get into the New York office early, but then I would leave at 4:30 in the afternoon and walk back up. And I would take a nap on the train in the morning and a nap on the train at night. And as a result, I learned over the years I could get by on 4 hours of sleep a night.
That is just absolutely incredible. We're coming up to the top of the hour, so I'm waiting to see whether my clock is right or whether the cuckoo's going to come on right on time. We're going to bring our other guests back onto the show. So let me just bring in Schweb and Julie and Tally as we reach. I mean, that was just extraordinary, Mike. Hey, Mike, just one last question. What was it like working with your dad?
most interesting thing is we used to do seminars together in Taipei, Seoul, Singapore, and it was interesting when the clients looked at, they couldn't tell. It was like his father and the son doing seminars together, and somehow we pulled it off. It was fun.
So would you acknowledge each other then? You wouldn't say dad or anything, or
we say Mr. Piker or Michael. Yeah, but it was an interesting building Yoko ORC in Tokyo, which is now part of Mercer, and ORC Singapore with my dad, was one of the best experiences. I think that's the cuckoo clock. No?
I think we heard the cuckoo. So there we go. We've had the cuckoo. We know our time is up. It has been an honor to have Fred and Mike Piker on our show today to talk about the evolution of global mobility. It's been an honor to have Schweb from Fragment talking about the UK change of government. It's been an honor to have Julie Barron talking about the US elections and what might happen there. And it's always an honor to work with the wonderful Tally Gorin. But remember, next week is actually the last episode of our season. So after that, we're off for August. But we have such a great show for you next week. We're going to be talking about celebrities on the move. We've got Shy Diane and Rekha Simpson from Vialto, who, if you haven't listened, do check out their wonderful podcast, Celebrities on the Move. We're going to be talking Beyonce. Oh, there's the cuckoo clock really going now. We're going to be talking Beyonce, Taylor Swift, Pharrell Williams, Kylian Mbappe, Cillian Murphy, and even Prince Harry. What more do you want than that? Everybody have a great week, and we will see you this time next week. Take care and have a great week. Bye.
Bye.